Hi, Chad. It's so wonderful to see you on your land. This has been a little bit of a technological challenge to get this right, but I'm so happy that people, at least who are watching the video version of this, get to see the living food forest, the living permaculture landscape that you live in and that you've designed. So tell us what we're seeing here.
So this was built from flat ground. In 5 days, we were able to take that and create the whole waterway, terrace system. And it's a kind of choose your own adventure. If you notice the different trails and the different paths, you can actually create all these different aspects to create a very dynamic growing system. So we're looking at a tunnel of roses. We have these pathways you can follow, and it's edible, medicinal the whole way. But then we highlight it, if you can see that cast iron furniture back there, with these destination spots.
Yeah.
So you can create places where you want to live in the garden. And
That's
with all these different aspects, we create all this different habitat for all creatures to live in. And so pollinators, we have the furry ones here. There's deer, wolves, bears moving through because there's no fence, there's no tractor, there's no irrigation system. And so it's pretty much designed to hold the water, and water is life. So you have this abundance just naturally being held in the
Mhm.
landscape.
It's what I love so much about permaculture that you're designing with with nature rather than fighting against nature. So where you are in Minnesota, you're setting up something that is quite different than what might be set up in a place like Texas or California, right? So what you plant, how you hold the water, all of those elements are specific, aren't they, to not even just Minnesota as a state and a region, but even your land specifically, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so you design to the landscape and you see all the advantages because what's possible is usually more than people can imagine. So when you design with those elements, it's pretty much the same wherever you go. You look at the challenges or advantages of your landscape, but I'm also looking at the people or person that I'm designing it around because it's a marriage of what are their strengths, what are their dreams, goals, and visions. And when you start to bring those out in a type of dreaming process I do, the pieces tend to fall into place naturally.
Mhm.
Um, So I'm creating different income streams or very similar ones to what people have and creating pretty much their own sanctuary. So all the places I developed, when I go back to them, they've grown a lot more. The people have grown more. They're finding different doors and possibilities open up for them that they didn't expect, along with
Mm.
just their daily life, their you could say quality of life, but it kind of rewrites your story when you're anchored in nature because of the
Mhm.
healing and just the benefits of when it gives back to you.
Yeah. I've talked to other guests about, nature comes up a lot on the Everyday Mystic because it is a powerful and very tangible and real way of connecting to the divine. I mean, it is a product of, just as we are, a product of, God's creation. And the more we spend in nature, the more we can connect to that divinity. And so a lot of people who are, becoming spiritual or want to connect more to their spiritual nature, they find themselves in nature, right? They go to those escapes, they go to those retreats, they go away into nature in order to have that experience. And so what you're creating is essentially that kind of nature spiritual sanctuary on people's land, on people's property, so that they don't have to go away necessarily, right, to a retreat somewhere or some other continent. They can actually experience that connection closer to home.
exactly. And people are always going on vacation to look for a paradise. But what you don't realize is you can totally recreate the landscape and create it abundantly. Like I've had many people walk in and they start crying because it
Mm,
has such a response that's deep, like you said, that source. And so when you are in an abundant system and you can feel it and see it, you're actually breathing it in. These compounds actually into our lungs become part of our blood. So
mhm.
it literally becomes part of you. The sun is soaking into your skin. Um, and the eyes are literally windows to the soul. If you think of the silica and glass, the silica in our eyes take in the sunlight, and there's ionic signatures from the sunlight as it's a plasmal downpour. And
Mm.
so your body receives this, your skin being the largest organ can take in the sun. But when you have all the senses engaged, you're seeing it, you're feeling it, you're eating it, uh, it takes on large proportions of a lot of experiences that people didn't realize. Like just before we got started, a hummingbird came and visited us just behind you and above you, and it was just checking us out. And uh, yeah, so all these experiences coming in through the garden are kind of an adventure every day. And like what I like to say is, it's kind of finding God or seeing His signature in nature because it's it's creation that's still in motion. So the creator's still creating. And when you engage with that, you can actually start to create things and there's a response back to you.
Right.
So it's like this nurturing mother's response. And when you do something positively, it responds positively. And then, same if you do something negatively, it'll respond and show you and give you that feedback loop. So that is how you can actually uh, start to engage with those four elements. And those
Mm.
four elements are the same everywhere. So once you get into that, um, and I'm usually starting with the water as far as the earth, and then you're even capturing it on other people's lands as it's coming through. And even if you're in Texas, you could have, like I've calculated, almost 1 billion gallons, but it's just not being held in the landscape.
Mhm.
So when you learn all these different ways of holding the landscape, you are not going to need the the irrigation, or you're not going to need the work necessary to thrive because you've laid the elements out where you want them.
Mhm.
And so, like in my gardens, it'll go up to like sometimes it's 15 feet of difference in elevation, but that all started from pretty much flat ground. And so the beauty and abundance you can
Hey,
create
Chad,
just at a design. Yes.
can you can you hear me?
Yeah.
Chad?
Can can you hear me?
Okay, I lost your video and then I lost your video and then your audio started breaking up. So can you maybe go back to, I don't, wherever the closer, I guess, spot was to your router or modem?
Yeah, you know what? I'm right next to it, but it looked like it had gotten, well, it's still going.
So you're back nearest it. Yeah, okay, there you are again. Let's see if your audio is coming through. Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. Yeah, your video is just frozen. If we can hear each other audio wise, I say we just keep going. I'll edit all of this out of the actual audio podcast and then the video, I'll just end it at where it cuts out. And so the video will just be the beginning of our
Okay,
conversation.
sure.
Yeah. And if it comes back, cool, but we won't worry about it. We can just keep talking.
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, so it's when we first met and connected, I was taken by your connection to earth and land and to these systems, and it felt very deeply like a spiritual connection. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, we're going to dig this up and plant this stuff and do, I think a lot of people, when they imagine either what, I don't think a lot of people honestly know what a permaculturist is. So maybe we can talk about that too. But when people think of landscape designers or people who work with the earth, I think they imagine that they just go in, tear shit up, and then plant a bunch of new stuff or that's there. And what you do and what other permaculturists do is so different. It's it's about, well, why don't you explain it in your words, since that's your life, and what you do? But that to me is this deep spiritual connection with the earth that's so different than just, quote unquote, working the land.
Yeah, and it is kind of a reconnection, and it's ancient. It's in us, it's in our blood, so we can feel that. And I feel like our culture has become, it's almost like a gestation inside these four walls, because I see a lot of people coming back out and reconnecting, especially in the last few years.
Mm,
And my mentor was from Austria, and the permaculture world didn't even know he existed, because he was a mile up in the Alps, and he had hand dug his first pond at 5 years old and had his first US installation uh, 10 years ago. So he was in his 70s at that time. And what he taught me elevated everything I did or had learned to a huge degree. And just to give you an idea, um, he's pretty much the world master, and he took me under his wing, and he gets 35 below temps as an extreme low, but he's able to grow lemon trees with lemons on them outside. So just a natural ecosystem that's way outperforming the surrounding nature. So
mhm,
that's where we come in with spirit and can elevate the game way beyond what we thought. And so his work is amazing. Um, he chose me out of like 100 people when he saw us work together for 11 days, and then with our designs. And then he took me under his wing and pretty much just kept blowing my mind and downloading things that are pretty amazing. Um, you almost have to. You can see pictures of it, you can see video, but when you actually walk through one of these landscapes, it
mm,
really can take your breath away.
yeah.
'Cause it can be like, just to give you an example of his place, over 70 ponds cascading into each other. It's percolating through the landscape, over 30 different kinds of fish, over 30 different kinds of mushroom. And because that life pulse is so great in there, things are reseeding themselves. And honestly, by year 7 in mine, it was thriving so much. We had a rare bird from Asia come in. We have insects I don't even recognize, because it's like nature has this connectivity, like a duck knows how to fly south.
Mhm,
You can create something that uh, insects, birds, animals know about it without even having been there. So when I created my first pond, 7 different kinds of frogs came in.
mm,
Um, and so you create this overproducing system that then takes hold. And now I even have the animals and birds bringing in plants that I don't have, like vervain and parasol mushroom came in, and they're planting out into the forest next to me faster than I could plant it out. And that was my original vision, was to plant out the Spirit Mountain Park, which was the Garden of Eden for the Ojibwe here, because it was so abundant. And so I had that vision through a book called The Visual Feast, but I imagined I'd be out there planting it. But because of
mhm,
this relationship and this nexus of this garden and how birds and animals can live in it, eat from it, they're actually planting it out with me.
Mm,
And I know if I see the bear in my apple tree or the birds are eating the grapes, that they're telling me that those are ready to be harvested.
mhm,
And so you're working with these elements, but you're also taking the cues from nature. It
mhm,
becomes, I mean, it's very much in us, and it just needs to be reawakened and kind of shown the way. Because I work very simply, where it is I'm looking at the contours of the land. I'm looking at how much rain falls, how much can be collected from outside of your property or your yard, and then you're holding the water and you're planting it out. And so when you have, let's say you have a flat backyard, you can go down 6 feet and you can come up 6 feet. And even if you're in town, now you've dropped down into this bowl of green, your own little sanctuary, where the visual and even the sounds are buffered and nature pours in. So when you
mhm,
create one of these, what Sepp would call, my mentor, a decentralized water retention landscape, that just means you're holding water everywhere, which makes everything much easier to grow.
mhm.
And then nature pours in. And when you have pollinators, especially like honeybees, then all your fruits increase, all your flowers increase, everything is produced more abundantly.
Yeah. So for those people who live in suburban areas where they don't have the kind of land that you're sitting on right now, and so you're talking about even a yard, you could drop the yard down by 6 feet, create a bowl, create contours, create sanctuary within even just a blocky backyard situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where part of the dreaming comes in, because when they see examples of what's possible, um, like at my place, I call it choose your own adventure because there's many paths. Like I just took you through that tunnel of roses. There's
Hmm.
archways of kiwis and grapes and hops. And these are all creating shade and canopy too, so that the ground is cooler. It's holding the water. It's blocking wind so you don't have the evaporation. And that's part of the dreaming and empathy that comes in, because when you know little cues like what does water like to be? And water likes to be cold, dark, moving, and alive. And so when you take those things and you create that for water, water responds back to you positively. And you can do that with a tree or a flower or a whole landscape. What would this like? And then when you come back and you see the response, because you get that response loop, then it gives you your epiphanies.
It's such a
Even
beautiful
animals.
harmony. Oh, even with animals, you're saying.
Yeah, would you be happy in that animal's place? Or
Yeah.
what would make them happier? And our ducks and chickens are free range. We now have a Colorado mountain dog, but even the 7 years before that, um, they were free range and they were around predators right in the garden, like 20 feet from them, that didn't touch them. Like the weasel had his home right there by the pond, and they would always be out in the pond, but the weasel had all of its food and needs already around them. It was hunting the frogs or the snake and whatever else, but we ended up seeing him dead in the driveway a few years ago. But yeah, he lived a long life and
Mhm.
he had everything he needed in the garden. So
Mhm.
it kind of breaks the mold on the predator prey perception.
Yes. Well, everything within permaculture does, and it's like you said, it's within us. It's something that is part of our own nature too, of when our needs are met, we are also harmonious and joyful and in flow and in this alignment where we can attract all the things we want to attract because those needs are met. So we are part of that too. And permaculture so beautifully takes the person is very much, the person is a part of the landscape, an integral part, right? How you move through it, how you access it is all a piece of it, as well as every single creature and plant and other energetic being would relate within that. And it's so beautiful because that system is nature itself. I mean, it is kind of this, it's how it's meant to be, right? But we've been so removed from nature that, like you said, it's a reawakening or a re-education that gets to happen among people who maybe lost that connection and that understanding. Oh, this is actually how things are meant to be. We've just been boxed in by buildings and concrete and cities to where we've forgotten a lot of that. But I love within permaculture too, of that, like you were
And it's
describing
nice.
that, well, that you were describing that each of the elements has multiple functions. It's like you've got this beautiful canopy tunnel of kiwi fruit growing, and there, of course, you've got the fruit, but then you're creating the shade for humans and even other animals. You're creating habitat for birds in there. So everything that you're designing in permaculture has all these multi-layered functioning, which is nature too, right? You're just mimicking that from nature, aren't you?
Right, right. And uh, the style I'm doing is a little different because Sepp worked with uh, Earthworks, which wasn't really with Bill Mollison, David Holmgren, wasn't part of it. But Sepp had been doing it for decades, so he had really mastered that. And so it elevates the game hugely. If you think of ancient growing systems where they
Hmm.
created terraces over generations, now that can be done in days,
Hmm.
and the response is quick. So I'm even doing it. I've done it with the Mennonites with their dairy camels, where they're on the edge of the Mojave Desert, only getting 7 inches of rain a year, which is crazy. But after we did a number of different ways of harvesting the water, they have more water than they need because what I created was a special soil for holding the water that became water stepped terraces. So these terraces fill up with water and they charge the whole ground with water. It becomes more living. And as you do this, the earth becomes more of a sponge. And when it's more of a sponge, now you have a landscape that's more drought proof, more flood proof because the roots are all anchored in. And it's even more, yeah, flood, fire, and drought proof. They've found with the floods that happen that the best thing, more than riprap or concrete walls, are woody roots of trees and bushes.
Hmm.
And so when you anchor those in and your land becomes a sponge, which means more living, more, you could say, humus, it actually has the capacity to hold tons more water and it holds a ton of network of roots. And the real powerhouse of doing these earthworks is you're bringing the fire or fuel into the landscape by bringing the air into the earth. So there's two more elements, like we said, water, but
Hmm.
then you have the air and the earth during the creation of it to be the fuel for it. And now you have really soft soil so that it can receive, like I'll broadcast 1,000,000 seeds on this soft ground that's got the air in it. And when the first rains come, they plant the seeds and it plants the rain and charges up these beds. And the roots dive down because it's soft. And the
Hmm.
worms are my plows. That's why I really don't need a tractor. And they're part of my fertility along with soil building plants.
Hmm.
So all these things layered together, just it really becomes a dynamic, resilient system where even the next rain's coming, the rain's slowly percolating through to remineralize itself, but then you also have perfect drainage.
Hmm.
And there's a little thing you can do where you can hold out your hand flat, like a flat farm field, and feel the sun on your hand. And now you can angle your hand about 70 degrees and now feel how much more the sun is like these terraces become more like solar panels or solar captures. And so everywhere you see at my place, I have all this stuff growing, and it's a living mulch that's exuding all these compounds and hormones and other synergies in between different plants that create a living atmosphere. And so
Mm.
that's what you're breathing in, breathing something in, whether you can smell the fragrances or it's just the compounds that are in the air. You have all these different plants, different aspects, and different feels.
You
I've
mentioned
even
the
dug down. Oh, I was going to say, I dug through this terrace to make that rose tunnel, and I was still hitting earthworms at 8 feet deep.
wow.
So the water and the worms are just, it's amazing what they're doing to create the life that's just pouring out of these.
You mentioned those three elements and the fourth being fire, right? How do you utilize that in within the system?
So when you create these beds, you have your southern aspect is your sunnier, hotter. Your northern is going to be your more cooler. But these earthworks will block that wind to block evaporation of the water.
Mm.
And then when I'm doing water features, it's good to align them with the prevailing winds because as the wind is blowing over it, it's bringing air into your waterways. So it can be ponds, it can be spillways, waterfalls. But as that, you see little waves or riffles, those are all bringing in air. So the fire in rocks are kind of like an everlasting mulch. So that living mulch is really nice. But when you think of like Sepp creating a microclimate for the lemon trees outside, you
Yeah.
use big rocks because they'll hold the heat from the sun,
Mm.
especially when you face them southwest, because you're getting the last heat of the day after the atmosphere is warmed up. And then at night, that rock is releasing the heat like a masonry oven. So then you're creating microclimates out of that.
Hmm. So capturing that heat and using it, radiate, letting it radiate out, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so incredible. And when uh, I think after we had worked together and I saw you in action and really got to know you better, we talked about some of your process of when you would go to people's properties and stay there, sleep there if you could, the night before you started working with them, to actually dream into the land and feel and have that connection, communion with the land. And I thought, wow, what a beautiful way to actually get the messages, hear what the land wants, right? So can you talk a little bit about that, sort of dreaming with the land process?
Yeah, and that's really important because designing remotely, I can look at a map and the contours and look at the water, and I start to get a remote vision of it. But when you're on the landscape, I'll typically do like a 3 day on-site design assessment, and and the people are just as important as the land, and they're learning the process and seeing what I'm seeing then, and then the dream starts to unfold in just what they would like to see. But then another part of the dreaming is actually dreaming out on the land because what we receive at that time can be cultivated inside of you. Where I'll bring out a mason jar full of water, I'll sleep out in areas that I'm called to, and what comes through is, and it's actually gained in strength. And I should say this is another technique I learned from Sepp, that I start to go into lucid dreams and see the landscape of what it can be and possibilities I had not imagined. And now twice I've had where I've dreamt of landscapes and designs before I've gotten to the property,
Mm.
before I've even met the people. which is, it makes me wonder where do we go during our dreams, or what else is possible?
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like I'm just starting to scratch the surface.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So you're starting to pre-dream premonition of what's coming to you, what's magnetizing to you, and you're seeing it before you actually meet it in reality. That's cool.
This, yeah, this last one actually came out like exactly like the dream.
Mm,
It was phenomenal. So there's a series of waterfalls, this pond, and the people living there said we had totally discarded this place as not useful at all, marginal, and now it's our favorite spot.
mm,
And when I went out there, and it was during the hottest time, and this was in East Texas, I went to where I was called for that place, and there I saw a little gleam down in the valley. And so I went down there, and it was a little bit of moisture. And as I dug down, I realized there's a vein of water down there. So when water likes to be cold, dark, and moving, sometimes it'll just drop down. Like we see in
mhm,
California, we see a dry landscape. Like when I worked in Malibu, uh, there were no trees there anymore, which there used to be, but they were clear cut. And so the water just dropped down. But when you collect all the little veins and you bring them together, you actually have a more of a rushing water scenario instead of it just going beneath the landscape and into the ocean. So yeah, actually we were working with Robert Kennedy Jr. on getting legislation for personal property owners to be able to use their water, which seems ridiculous. It's kind of your
mm,
birthright to be able to use the water. And then what we do is we solar pump it back to the top, and then it goes back into this waterway and percolates through the whole landscape.
mhm. So it's rather than it just rushing away, you're letting it slowly move through the landscape. Is that what you mean?
Right. In
Yeah.
ponds, but then you think of ponds, the water lens and the waterways, the water pushes out into the landscape. And
Mhm,
then there's different design techniques like keyline design I'll use. And then when you have water in the landscape, I like to put different kinds of mushrooms in because they hold water, they send out nutrients, and they improve the health of everything around. And then it's just like with wine caps, it's just like a juicy steak. So sometimes
mhm.
I'll have a flush. I've had flushes of thousands of mushrooms, and you can dry them. Like in Minnesota, when the sunlight isn't very much in the winter, and vitamin D is kind of at a premium, you can take these dried caps of the mushroom, you flip them upside down in the sunlight, and that geometry reactivates the vitamin D in your mushrooms.
Oh, wow.
So you can get hundreds. I mean, and we also wild harvest all around. We have an 1,800 acre Spear Mountain Park, and you can get hundreds of mushrooms, but then I'll bring back plants and mushrooms and I'll put them in similar places in my landscape so that when I see those mushrooms flushing or those wild leeks or other fruit, I know that they're probably going out in the woods. So instead of me having to go look to see if they're going, I usually just look and see if they're going here. I usually put them in a place that's easy to see. And then I know when to go and what's going on out there.
Right. So it's like a little indicator garden for you, like telling you what's going on out
Hmm.
in the wilds so that you can see what nature's telling
Yeah,
you.
it's super.
Mm, so cool. Your,
Exactly.
this, your connection to nature, which to me, as we've been talking about, is inseparable from your connection to spirit. And was this always there for you? Did you grow up this way? What was the, I guess, the spark or the impetus for you to either work with nature or to work with spirit through nature? Which came first?
I think we're born with it as children. I wanted to be an Indian living in the woods in a cabin. And I had a lot of nature around me, but then you fit into the box or into the world. And I was a design engineer, and it was kind of killing my spirit. So I decided to leave, and I ended up in the redwoods, half a mile from the ocean, a week before 9/11 happened. And we would all gather at night because there was other people connected close to where I was by trails, and it had gas lamps, a wood stove, and we go down by the fire at night. And sometimes people would bring a bottle of wine, a guitar, and there were cutting boards, and we would create a feast every night, and it was amazing. And then 9/11 happened, and we were all sitting there like, we don't know what's going to happen in the world, and let's create more gardens and greenhouses, which I hadn't done or hadn't been in since I was a kid with my mom. And so I found an opening in the canopy of the redwoods, and I opened up the ground, and I got hit with something where I had a massive spiritual experience, and it kind of left the world in that moment, still on the ground. And I really didn't know what was going on. I was like, I am having a massive spiritual experience. And when I was coming back, I could sense, at least when I was coming back, I could sense presences around the perimeter, around the redwood trees around me. And that never left. That began the entire thing. Um, and then right before I met Sepp, I was doing Qigong in my gardens and imagining, because when I opened Sepp's book, I was like, this is going to be off the charts. This guy is like nobody else I've seen. And this guy I was playing music with had handed me a book at that time called The Finhorn Garden. And I said, well, what is it about? He goes, I don't know, but I guess you're supposed to read it. And I got home and I went through it quick for like 10 minutes. And then when I went to lay down to go to sleep, I just got into the most beautiful feeling. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I lucid dreaming? And it got more beautiful. And all of a sudden it turned into a white light, like a blinding white light. And I started to get into like a capsule of energy. And I opened my eyes and I was still in the dark room, and I closed my eyes and I'm back in this blinding light. And so it got so amazing. I couldn't believe it. And then this voice said, I'm going to help you with your gardens.
Mm.
And it actually startled me. I had no idea what was going on. And then not long after that, I went to Sepp's installation, and this farm I'm on now had fallen through like 6 months before. And when we showed our designs and Sepp said, this is your new designer, uh, after that, his Austrian students said, you know that farm that fell through? Well, a lot of people that start working with Sepp, the land of their dreams comes to them. And a couple hours later, the lady that owned the land called me and said, I'm ready to sell to you. And now
Mm.
it's half price.
Mm.
So it was a phenomenal day.
Yeah, miracles everywhere. Mm.
Yeah, and then it's only strengthened, and the insights and things opening up have been incredible. I like to say, when you start making these decisions, like just even to leave my engineering job, other doors open up that weren't able to open up. And so more doors kept opening up until I found myself outside. And another, I was doing biodynamics here I've done it for over 20 years, but like, yeah, around the seventh year again, um, my sister-in-law took a live photo of me. My son was on my lap. And when we scrubbed slowly back through it, there was a big orb that flew in front of us and a big one that flew behind us. And we were just like, what? That's not the dust on the lens camera. And so
Mm-hmm.
we were taking pictures, more of them, live photos, and they were going through the walls and through the ceiling. And so then I went outside and there were thousands of them flying everywhere.
Mm.
Yeah, so I have
Yeah.
no idea what those are, honestly. I've sought it out a
Yeah.
little bit, but um, it might be biodynamics. It might be because this is Spirit Mountain, the place where spirits
Mm-hmm.
dwell.
Mm-hmm.
Even before the Ojibwe, the peoples before them said it was the place where spirits dwell. But I feel like you can create a spirit to your place. Like the French say, the terroir. You can
Mm-hmm.
create that lively nexus. That practicing this biodynamics is what brings in nature spirits, and he goes into some of that. But I think this is what our ancestors naturally did for ages. But now we have a chance to create it quicker than ever because of the heavy equipment, which typically seem like uh, an object of destruction, now becomes a forward escape into a Garden of Eden type creation.
Yeah.
And we also have seeds and plants from around the world that we could never access. Like I'm in Minnesota and I have 9 different kinds of kiwi. I have over 300 different varieties of things that weren't available to people around here forever.
Just going to pause for a moment because the fire alarm's going off here.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
just doing a test. No, no, it's not. We knew it was going to happen, but it's just a test. It should stop in just a moment.
This is only a test.
This is only a test, exactly.
The whole thing.
Right. Just a big old
This
test.
this life. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, maybe we'll just keep this in.
So good seeing you.
Yeah. Um,
Give us time to pause. Eh?
mhm. They said it would be short, but this is a lot longer than I anticipated.
It's like a meditation.
Hmm. Why don't you keep going? Because this is going to be coming through on my side. I can always edit it out.
Yeah, and just on the note of more is possible than ever now than in any other time is so incredible to me. What is at our fingertips now with nature and creating sacred space that's edible, medicinal. It takes forest bathing to a whole nother level where it is like nature's spa
Hmm.
because I mean it really evokes some deeper spirit mystery that I think when we come back in connection to it, it's all new.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, kind of the challenge. Like, I see people changing their lives now, like immensely. People being able to work remotely, you can sense there's a new world is already here. And everywhere I go, I see people reassessing their lives because that I think is part of the blessing in disguise was it was kind of that alarm we just heard. It's kind of a wake up call and to wake up to yourself again. And if you look at nature as a source, you can even take that further because I'm not creating a farm. I'm creating gardens that kind of fit my lifestyle and now creating them for people to help them wake up to who they are and evoke that deeper spirit inside themselves. Um, I'm using the plants medicinally. There's over 50 different medicinal plants that my wife has been making, and there's tinctures and there's healing beauty products that are also medicinal that have just not been tapped into. And I see a surge of people now getting back into it. So it's beyond food security, um, and even sovereignty because it's anchoring your spirit back into it.
Mm-hmm.
and your experiences on earth, on in your life, are precious. And when you take those moments back, and then you are more in your flow. We and when we create these outdoor spaces, like either here or other people's places, they want to be outside more because it's more enriching. You get enveloped in the garden. Like we're making that, where you saw that furniture, those are all climbing roses that will envelop that whole space as just one of many spaces around here. Or the water, you know, um, to be able to swim in your own water feature, even if you're in Texas. But then you also have fish. You can put in, like, we'll put in rainbow trout here. They're very simple. You just want it at least 12 feet deep. So you can create that sovereignty, you can create the moments, and then you can be growing gourmet foods that you can't get anywhere. And gourmet medicines, you could even say. We'll make a salad of 30 or more different flowers, blossoms, leaves, because it's growing everywhere. Um, we have we have probably 1 million mugwort, which is nature's ivermectin. So it's just thriving here. Um, it's really incredible. Every year it gets bigger, taller, more productive, and more beautiful. And it just, when you sink into one of those where the elevation comes up around you, like if you grow up on top of a 6 or 12 foot terrace and then you grow 15-foot sunflowers, then that's getting close to, like, 20, 30 feet high. It gives you a whole new perception. There's pretty simple ways to go about it, but really it starts with that dreaming process, because you can do this in the desert or you can do it in Siberia. So really it's coming back to you saying, what is your dream? Because more is possible than imagined. I've always found that over and over. People are always like, they didn't know what was possible. And
Mm-hmm.
so when they start to get a glimpse of that, that ignites a passion, kind of ignites the spirit. And then now you're on a journey.
Do you bring people or invite people to your property for tours so that they can see what's possible in a real and feel what's possible in a tangible way? Or is that your sanctuary and you like to keep it that way and you go off and out to places?
Actually, we had closed the gates for many years, but we just opened back up, and we had a group of 20 people. I think there were people mentioning me on Mike Adams' podcast, and so then they discovered through them that where I was, and got a hold of me, and they said, we have a bunch of people that want to come to your place.
Mm.
And so they came and they had a blast. Instead of being like a 1 or 2 hour tour, we were hanging out for like 4 hours and had a big feast, and it was so great. Um, and it's good to do that again. My younger brother said, I was having tons of people out here when I started, and then my wife taught me how to be a hermit, and it was kind
Mhm.
of cool to anchor in just into nature. And my younger brother said, I see you closing the gates, but I see you opening them back up in 10 years with this beard and bringing people back into your paradise. But
Mhm.
what I didn't expect was I'd be going back out to help people create their own. And that's been a magical ride.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting. I didn't realize that you had taken a pause on that and that reemergence or reigniting of you working on other people's land was new for you. So you've been doing that now for a few years of going back out to people's properties and working with them.
Right. Yeah. I'm leaving in a couple weeks for North Carolina. And we already went through the dreaming process. And there'll be about a dozen people there. Half of them are students that just started a certification process that I began. And so, yeah, everyone's excited to get their hands back on it. And we'll be creating a series of water features that cascade into each other, and gardens alongside them, and an outdoor kitchen. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. Um, and just starting the certification project is really great because people are really resonating with it, and it's taking a life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's inspired me. I wrote the outline for a book. I'm starting to flesh that out, and it's feeling like a fairy tale type choose your own adventure book, which
Nice.
which touches upon a lot of what we talked about, but really gets back to the foundational, along with the dreaming and helping people to be able to do this easily, successfully. And I go back to people that I helped last year, and they are in full swing. Like they have amazing things going on. Um, and it's some people have gone into full rotational grazing, where they're doing the sheep and the cows,
Mm.
and they have the terraces, and they have all the perennial backbone of food that they could want. Um, and then production gardens. I've got a really cool method for doing production gardens that are simple, no till. You set it up, and it's kind of a take on the wood chip are the trails. So instead of a normal raised bed with just a wood board, now the wood chips are holding water, but they're also holding mushrooms. So the
Mm.
trails are even producing on top of that, on top of what you're producing with your beds.
Mhm.
It's pretty dynamic, a dynamic way to design a production garden.
A biodynamic way to I love that you're in this season of life. It sounds like you went in and took stock of you and focused on your wife and your property and your land and cultivated such deep, deep connection to the work to now be able to emerge as the mentor, as the teacher, and as this leader in this incredible movement. I'm so happy that you're doing that and sharing your gifts that way.
Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah, someone
Thank
said, it was Kyle Kingsbury said, "You're like the hermit that came off the mountain." He said Paul Chek was saying how the hermit goes to the mountain alone with the lantern to gather light. And when the lantern gets too heavy, he comes back down with the lantern to share it.
you.
And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting take on the hermit.
Yeah, it's a beautiful metaphor. I feel that to be true too, even if you look at that from popular culture and it's just, the going deep into the cave or going away and that's the metaphor, but and went into your land and for me it's been a lot of inner work, really moving the energy in and spending that time here, processing, aligning, letting go, reigniting, building. And there's season for that for, I think throughout life, whether it's, just one part of your life or, even throughout your weeks, right? To kind of move through those cycles of, inner charging and then outer expression and moving that way. And seems to be a natural cycle that we can get spun out from as humans to where all of our energy is out here externally. And it's all about, whether it's us pushing energy out or getting and gathering energy from out there and getting devoid from within. It's like we always have to go back in and spend time there to bring the light back. Yeah.
That is nice. Yeah, cultivating your own space inside. It's like this inner garden or inner landscape, because we're a reflection of that on the outside. Yeah, I love that.
100%. Mm. Thank you so much for spending all this time with us and showing us the beautiful land that you're on. I could even smell things as I'm looking. It looks so just beautiful and bountiful. And I'm so happy we got to do this with you on your land outside. Thank you so much, Chad. Any links and any ways of people connecting to the work you're doing, and if they want to learn from you or grow with you, I'll put those in the show notes. Any last words you want to leave with people?
If you can imagine it, you can do it. You can dream it. And there's more possible in nature than you can imagine, because I feel like she's coming back out in a new way. And we just need to have the eyes to see it. Even something small, you'll see the response when it's working in nature with nature.
So, so beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks, Corissa.
I